Elena Vasquez had expected the stairs, but the actual weight of them still pressed against her shoulders like a physical force as she walked through the gleaming corridors of Station Kepler 7. Every step echoed in the vast hallways designed to accommodate beings 3 times her size.
Packed into
Every
a cargo
echo
hold
seemed
with
to announce
47
her
other recruits
inadequacy
from
to
across the
anyone
galaxy.
within
She had
hearing
spent the
distance.
3-week journey trying to make herself
transport
invisible
had been
among
bad
creatures
enough.
that could have snapped her in half without
Packed
effort.
into a cargo hold with 47 other recruits from across the galaxy, she had spent the 3-week journey trying to make herself invisible among creatures that could have snapped her in half without effort. The Draknari with their armored hides and retractable bone spears. The Zephyrians whose crystalline bodies could withstand the vacuum of space. The massive Gorvani, each standing nearly 4 meters tall and weighing as much as a small shuttle. And then there was her. 168 centimeters of soft flesh, brittle bone, and what the galaxy considered laughably weak muscle mass. "Look what the recruitment scraper dragged up from the bottom of the gene pool," rumbled a voice behind her, the words carrying the distinctive harmonic undertones of the carry. Elena didn't need to turn around to know that Crexmore was addressing his cluster of followers, as he had been doing since the moment he laid eyes on her 3 weeks ago. Crexmore was everything the Galactic Defense Coalition prized in a recruit. Standing 2.5 meters tall, his thick gray skin could deflect most small arms' fire, and his 4 arms each possessed enough strength to bend steel beams. His species had evolved as pack hunters on a world where everything bigger than a house pet tried to kill everything else. They were natural warriors, natural leaders, and natural bullies. "I heard they lowered the physical standards just to get more human recruits," added Vexka, a female Draknari whose voice hissed through rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Apparently, their homeworld owes the Coalition some significant debt, so they're sending bodies to pay it off." Elena kept walking, her standard-issue boots clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that seemed too fast, too nervous, too human. She had learned long ago that responding to taunts only made them worse, and, besides, what could she say? They weren't entirely wrong. Earth was indeed heavily in debt to the Coalition after the Centauri incident, and humanity's recruitment quotas had been tripled in recent years. What they didn't know, what none of them could know, was why Elena had volunteered. Not just for the standard 5-year service term, but for the full 20-year career track that would take her to the deepest reaches of Coalition space. She had something to prove, not to them, but to herself. And, more importantly, she had something to hide. The main briefing hall was a cathedral of modern engineering, its domed ceiling displaying a real-time holographic map of Coalition space. Thousands of star systems twinkled in the artificial twilight above their heads, connected by the golden threads of hyperspace routes that bound the galaxy's civilized worlds together. Elena found a seat in the back, naturally gravitating toward the shadows and hoping to avoid notice. It didn't work. "Attention, recruits." The voice that filled the hall belonged to Commander Thakresh, a Gorvani whose reputation preceded him throughout the galaxy. Standing 4.5 meters tall even in his relaxed posture, the commander's battle scars told the story of 3 decades spent fighting in the Outer Rim territories where the Coalition's authority grew thin and dangerous things lurked in the dark between stars. "You are here because your worlds have deemed you worthy of serving in the greatest military force this galaxy has ever seen," Thakresh continued, his deep voice carrying easily to every corner of the massive hall. "Some of you are here because of exceptional physical prowess. Others because of tactical brilliance or technical expertise. A few of you are here because your species needs to fulfill its recruitment obligations." The commander's eyes found Elena in the back row, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment as snickers rippled through the assembled recruits. "Regardless of why you are here, you will be held to the same standards as every other recruit who has passed through these halls. You will train together, fight together, and, if necessary, die together. The Coalition does not recognize species superiority. It recognizes only competence and courage." Brave words, Elena thought, but the reality would be different. It always was. The orientation continued for another 2 hours, covering everything from station procedures to the basic structure of Coalition military hierarchy. Elena tried to take notes, but found her attention drifting to the other recruits around her. They sat in natural clusters, species grouping with species, the strong gravitating toward the strong. She was an island of one in a sea of biological superiority. When the orientation finally ended, Elena was among the first to leave, hoping to find her assigned quarters and, maybe grab a few hours of peace before the real training began tomorrow. The corridors were less crowded now, most of the recruits having headed to the station's recreational facilities to bond with their new squad mates over whatever passed for alcohol in their respective metabolisms. She was studying the holographic directory near the residential section when footsteps approached from behind. Heavy footsteps, with the distinctive quadruple rhythm of the carry locomotion.
Lost, little human?
Crexmore's voice was closer than she expected, and Elena instinctively took a step forward before turning around.
He wasn't alone.
3 other the carry flanked him, along with 2 Drachnari and something that looked like a walking tree but was probably from one of the plant-based species in the outer colonies. They formed a loose semicircle around her, not quite threatening but definitely intimidating. "I'm fine, thank you," Elena said, proud that her voice came out steady despite the adrenaline spike making her hands shake.
"Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about as far from fine as it's possible to be."
Crexmore stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over her.
"You know what I think?
I think you're going to wash out of this program before the week is over. I think you're going to get yourself or someone else killed during training because you don't have what it takes to keep up with real warriors." Elena met his gaze, which required tilting her head back at an uncomfortable angle.
"I guess we'll find out tomorrow." The carry laughed, a sound like grinding stone.
"Yes, we will. And, when you do wash out, remember that I tried to save you the embarrassment by suggesting you quit now while you still have some dignity left." "I appreciate your concern," Elena said, her voice carrying just enough edge to let him know she wasn't intimidated, even though she absolutely was.
"But I think I'll stick around a while longer."
Crexmore's expression darkened. In the corridor's artificial lighting, his gray skin took on an almost metallic sheen, and Elena could see the subcutaneous armor plating that made his species so formidable in combat. One of his 4 hands flexed unconsciously, and she caught a glimpse of retractable claws sliding partially out of their sheaths. "Your funeral, human," he said finally, then gestured for his followers to move along. They departed with the same heavy footfalls that had announced their arrival, leaving Elena alone with her racing heart and the growing certainty that the next few months were going to be even more challenging than she had anticipated. She found her quarters 20 minutes later, a small but officially designed space that included a sleeping alcove, a desk, and a hygiene station. The walls were bare metal, and the single small viewport showed a view of the training grounds where tomorrow she would begin the most difficult period of her life. Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed and opened the small personal kit she had been allowed to bring from Earth. Most of it was standard issue clothing and hygiene items, but buried at the bottom was a small datapad containing her most precious possession, a video message from her brother Marcus, recorded just before she left Earth. "Hey, Al," his familiar voice said as his image appeared on the small screen.
"If you're watching this, it means you made it to the station in one piece. I know what you're thinking right now.
You're wondering if you made a mistake, if you're really cut out for this, if you belong there with all those alien super soldiers." Marcus had always been able to read her better than anyone else. Even across the vastness of space, he knew exactly what she was feeling.
"I want you to remember something, okay?
Remember what happened during the Toronto incident when you were 14.
Remember what you did, and remember how it felt. You're not weak, Elena. You're different. And, sometimes, different is exactly what the universe needs."
The message continued for another few minutes, filled with family news and encouragement, but Elena's mind had drifted back to Toronto and the day that had changed everything. The day she had first realized that there was something inside her that didn't quite fit the standard human template. Something that had saved a lot of lives and terrified her more than any alien warrior ever could. She had spent the last 8 years learning to suppress it, to hide it, to pretend it didn't exist. But, now, surrounded by beings who saw her as nothing more than soft prey, she wondered if it might be time to stop hiding. Elena closed the datapad and lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the subtle vibrations of the massive station around her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove herself. The other recruits expected her to fail, and, honestly, part of her expected the same thing. But there was another part, a deeper part that had been growing stronger since the moment she stepped off the transport, that whispered something different. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she needed to be. Outside her viewport, the training grounds were dark and empty, waiting for tomorrow's trials. Elena closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her dreams were filled with shadows that moved like predators and eyes that glowed with an intelligence that was definitely not human. When she woke the next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted during the night, like a door opening that had been locked for 8 years. Training would begin in 3 hours. Elena Vasquez had no idea that by the end of the day, everything the galaxy thought it knew about humanity would be called into question. The training grounds at dawn looked like an alien gladiatorial arena designed by someone with unlimited resources and a sadistic imagination. Obstacle courses twisted through the air in impossible configurations, gravity fields shifted and warped in designated zones, and holographic targets materialized and vanished in patterns that made Elena's eyes water just trying to follow them. Elena arrived early, partly out of nervousness and partly because she had given up trying to sleep after the third nightmare about burning buildings and screaming voices.
She wasn't the only early arrival, though.
A small group of recruits had gathered near the main equipment station, and she recognized most of them as the ones who had clustered around Crexmore during orientation. "Look who decided to show up," called out Vexka, her Draknari accent making the words sound like threats. "I was hoping you'd come to your senses overnight and caught the next transport back to your little dirtball of a planet." Elena ignored her, focusing instead on the elaborate display of training weapons and protective gear that lined the equipment station. Most of it was sized for larger species, but she spotted a section marked with human-compatible sizing. At least the Coalition was prepared for her presence, even if her fellow recruits weren't.
"Attention, recruits!" Commander Thakresh's voice boomed across the training ground, and Elena turned to see the massive Gorvani striding toward them with an entourage of instructors from various species. "Today begins your physical assessment phase. You will be tested in combat skills, tactical thinking, endurance, and adaptability. Some of you will excel. Some will struggle. Some will fail completely and be sent home before lunch." The commander's gaze swept across the assembled recruits and lingered on Elena for just a moment longer than the others. "Your first challenge is individual combat assessment. You will face a training construct programmed with the fighting techniques of 17 different species. It will adapt its strategy based on your performance and will not stop until you defeat it or it defeats you. Medical teams are standing by." Elena felt her stomach drop. She had trained in basic self-defense on Earth, but that was against human opponents with human limitations. The idea of facing something that could simulate the combat abilities of beings like Crexmore was terrifying. "Recruit Vasquez," Thakresh called out, and Elena felt every eye on the training ground turn toward her. "You're first." Of course she was. Elena made her way to the combat circle, a raised platform surrounded by energy barriers that would contain the fight and protect spectators from any stray weapons fire. The other recruits gathered around the edges, their expressions ranging from anticipation to barely concealed glee. "Choose your weapons," instructed Sergeant Kexball, a scaled humanoid whose species Elena didn't recognize. The weapons rack offered everything from traditional blades to advanced energy weapons, all sized for human use. Elena's hand hovered over the selection for a moment before settling on a simple combat knife and a small energy pistol. Not the most impressive choices, but they were weapons she had at least some familiarity with. The training construct materialized in the center of the platform, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was roughly humanoid but taller and more heavily built, with the kind of perfect proportions that screamed artificial creation. Its surface shifted and rippled like liquid metal, and she could see sensor arrays where ice should be. "Combat parameters set to non-lethal but realistic damage simulation," announced Sergeant Kexball. "Construct, initialize Draknari combat protocols." The construct's form immediately began to change, growing taller and sprouting the distinctive arm blades that made Draknari warriors so feared in close combat. Its stance shifted into the predatory crouch that Elena had seen Vexka adopt during their brief encounters. "Begin." The construct moved with liquid grace, covering the distance between them in 3 flowing steps that would have been beautiful if they weren't so obviously lethal.
Elena barely got her knife up in time to deflect the first blade strike, the impact sending shock waves up her arm and nearly driving her to her knees. She rolled backward, trying to create distance, and brought her pistol up to fire. The energy bolt struck the construct's chest and shoulder, causing it to stagger but not fall. Draknari's skin was naturally resistant to energy weapons, and apparently the simulation was accurate enough to include that detail. The construct pressed its attack, both arm blades weaving through the air in patterns that seemed designed more to intimidate than to kill quickly. Elena found herself giving ground steadily, her human reflexes barely fast enough to keep up with the artificial Draknari's assault. Around the edges of the combat circle, she could hear voices calling out encouragement and criticism in equal measure. Most of the criticism came from Crexmore's group, who seemed to be treating her inevitable defeat as entertainment. "She's already exhausted," Vexka hissed to her companions. "Look at her breathing. Humans have no endurance at all." "5 credits says she's down in the next 30 seconds, rumbled one of the Vicari. Elena heard them, even through the adrenaline haze and the ringing in her ears from deflecting another punishing blade strike. She heard them, and something deep inside her chest began to burn with a heat that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The construct feinted left and, then, drove both blades toward her midsection in a classic Draknari finishing move. Elena twisted desperately to avoid them, but her foot caught on the platform's slightly raised edge and she went down hard, her weapon skittering away across the smooth surface. The construct stood over her, blades positioned for the killing blow that would end the simulation. Around the circle, Elena could see satisfied expressions on alien faces, the look of beings whose lowest expectations had been confirmed. That's when something inside Elena Vasquez finally snapped. The change was instantaneous and absolute. One moment she was lying on her back, defenseless and defeated, and the next she was moving with a speed and fluidity that defied human physiology. She rolled between the construct's legs, came up behind it, and drove her shoulder into its back with enough force to send the artificial warrior stumbling forward. But it wasn't the speed that made the watching recruits fall silent. It wasn't even the sudden display of strength that let Elena lift and throw a construct that weighed twice what she did. It was her eyes. Elena's brown eyes had turned a brilliant, predatory gold, and they were fixed on the construct with the kind of focus that made every watching alien's instincts scream danger. When she moved now, it wasn't with the awkward desperation of a human out of her depth. It was with the controlled violence of something that had evolved to kill. The construct recalibrated its approach, switching from Draknari protocols to the carry combat patterns. It grew heavier, sprouting additional arms, its stance becoming more defensive and power-based. Elena didn't care. She flowed around its attacks like water around stone, each movement economical and perfectly timed. When the construct threw a punch with its primary right arm, she caught the wrist, used its own momentum to spin it around, and drove her elbow into the base of its skull with surgical precision. The construct went down like a falling building. Silence settled over the training ground like a physical weight. Elena stood over the deactivated construct, chest heaving, her golden eyes slowly fading back to their normal brown. She looked up at the circle of staring faces around her and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. They weren't looking at her like she was weak anymore. They were looking at her like she was something else entirely. "Combat assessment complete," Sergeant Kexval announced, his voice carefully neutral. "Construct defeated in 4 minutes, 37 seconds. Above average time for this difficulty setting." Elena retrieved her dropped weapons and walked toward the equipment return station, hyper-aware of every whisper and muttered conversation happening around her. She had exposed herself, lost control, and shown the galaxy something that humans weren't supposed to possess. "That was impossible," she heard Vexka saying to her companions. "Humans don't move like that. They don't have reflexes like that." "Maybe this one isn't entirely human," suggested another voice, and Elena's blood ran cold. Commander Thakresh appeared at her elbow as she was returning her weapons. Up close, the massive Gorvani was even more intimidating, his scarred hide telling stories of battles across the galaxy. When he spoke, his voice was pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Interesting performance, Recruit Vasquez. We should talk after training concludes."
it wasn't a request. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of additional assessments. Physical endurance tests that Elena completed with scores that raised eyebrows but didn't break any records. Tactical simulations where her performance was competent but unremarkable. Marksmanship trials where she demonstrated adequate but not exceptional skill. Through it all, she could feel the weight of observation from her fellow recruits and the training staff. Word of her combat performance had spread quickly, and now everyone wanted to see if the human would do something impossible again. Elena was careful not to give them what they wanted. She kept her responses within normal human parameters, made sure her reflexes stayed appropriately slow, and worked hard to project the image of someone who had simply gotten lucky during her first fight. It didn't work. Too many experienced eyes had seen what happened in that combat circle, and warriors from dozens of species knew the difference between luck and lethality. When training finally ended, Elena found herself walking toward Commander Thakresh's office with all the enthusiasm of someone heading to their own execution. The corridors seemed longer than they had the day before, and every step echoed with the certainty that her carefully constructed new life was about to fall apart. The commander's office was spartanly decorated, containing only a massive desk, several chairs sized for different species, and a wall display showing what appeared to be a real-time tactical overview of coalition military operations. Thakresh gestured for Elena to take a seat and then settled his considerable bulk behind his desk. "Your personnel file makes for interesting reading, Recruit Vasquez," he began, activating a holographic display that showed Elena's official records. Born in Toronto, Canada, on Earth. Excellent academic performance through secondary education. 2 years at the University of British Columbia studying xenobiology before dropping out to enlist. No previous military experience. No criminal record. No genetic anomalies noted in your medical evaluations. Elena said nothing, afraid that anything she might say would only make things worse. "What your file doesn't explain," Thakresh continued, "is how someone with no combat training and standard human physiology managed to defeat a construct that has a 73% success rate against experienced recruits from warrior species." "I got lucky," Elena said quietly. "No." The commander's voice was flat and certain. "You didn't. I've been training soldiers for 34 years, Recruit Vasquez. I know what luck looks like, and I know what genetic enhancement looks like, and I know what happens when someone tries to hide their true capabilities." Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Sir, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth. What happened in Toronto 8 years ago? What really happened?" The question hit Elena like a physical blow. She had known this day would come eventually, had known that someone would dig deep enough to find the connection she had tried so hard to bury. But knowing something was coming and being prepared for it were two very different things. "There was an accident," she said finally. "A chemical plant explosion. I was volunteering at a nearby youth center when it happened. A lot of people got hurt. And you helped with the rescue efforts." "Yes, sir. According to the official reports, you personally pulled 17 people out of burning buildings, including several adults who weighed more than you did. You moved through smoke and flame for 6 hours without protective equipment. You suffered no serious injuries despite exposure to toxic chemicals that hospitalized trained firefighters." Elena stared at her hands, unable to meet the commander's gaze. "The reports also note some unusual eyewitness accounts," Thakresh continued. "People claiming that your eyes changed color. Rescue workers saying you moved with impossible speed and strength. All of it dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations and adrenaline-fueled exaggeration. People see strange things during disasters," Elena said weakly. "Yes, they do. But 8 different witnesses reporting the same impossible details suggests something more than trauma hallucination." The commander leaned forward, his massive frame making the desk creak. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Recruit Vasquez. What are you?" Elena looked up and met his gaze, seeing intelligence and determination in those alien eyes. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than she was, tired of carrying secrets that felt heavier with every passing year. "I don't know," she said, and, for the first time in 8 years, it felt like the truth. I really don't know what I am. I just know that when people are in danger, when everything goes to hell, something inside me changes. Something that makes me faster, stronger, more than I should be.
And you've been hiding it ever since Toronto.
Wouldn't you? If you were different, if you were something that didn't fit into any category that existed, wouldn't you try to blend in and live a normal life?
Commander Thakresh was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was making a decision that would affect more than just Elena's immediate future.
Recruit Vasquez, what I'm about to tell you is classified information that goes far beyond your current security clearance.
But, given what I've observed today, I believe you need to understand the broader context of why you're really here.
Elena felt her heart rate spike.
Sir? The Coalition has been monitoring Earth for unusual individuals for the better part of a century.
People like you, who demonstrate capabilities that don't fit standard human parameters.
We call them variants, and they're far more common than your species realizes.
The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. She wasn't alone. She wasn't some kind of freak accident or genetic anomaly.
There were others.
How many? She asked. Currently?
We're tracking approximately 2,000 individuals worldwide with various degrees of enhancement.
Most of them don't even realize they're different.
They attribute their abilities to luck, adrenaline, or exceptional training.
A few, like you, are fully aware but work hard to hide what they can do. And the Coalition recruits them? When possible, yes.
But very carefully, and only after extensive evaluation.
What you demonstrated today, Recruit Vasquez, suggests that you may be something special even among variants.
Elena tried to process what she was hearing, but it felt like trying to understand a foreign language. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about humanity, about her place in the universe, was being rewritten in real time.
What happens now? She asked.
Commander Thakresh smiled, an expression that transformed his scarred features into something almost grandfatherly.
Now you learn what you're really capable of. And, if my suspicions are correct, the galaxy is about to discover that humanity has been vastly underestimated.
Outside the office windows, the training grounds were empty in the gathering dusk, waiting for tomorrow's challenges. Elena Vasquez sat in a chair designed for beings twice her size and tried to understand that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend. The other recruits thought she was weak, a liability, someone who would wash out before the week was over. They had no idea how wrong they were. The specialized training facility was located 3 levels below the main station, accessible only by authorization codes that Elena had received that morning along with instructions to tell no one where she was going. The corridors down here were different from the gleaming passages above, built from some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and something else, something that made Elena's enhanced senses prickle with unease. Dr. Sarah Chen was waiting for her in what looked like a combination laboratory and gymnasium, her slight frame dwarfed by equipment that Elena couldn't begin to identify. The woman was unmistakably human, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she had seen things that most people couldn't even imagine. Elena Vasquez, Dr. Chen said, extending a hand that was warm and callous despite her scientist's appearance.
I've been looking forward to meeting you ever since I read Commander Thakresh's preliminary assessment. Dr. Chen?
I wasn't expecting another human down here.
Most people aren't. I've been working with the Coalition's Variant Research Division for 12 years now.
Before that, I was a genetic engineer on Earth, trying to understand why some humans occasionally displayed capabilities that defied biological explanation.
Dr. Chen gestured for Elena to follow her deeper into the facility. What I discovered changed everything I thought I knew about human evolution.
They passed through a series of chambers filled with holographic displays, bioscanners, and equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Elena caught glimpses of data streams in languages she didn't recognize, showing biological models that looked human but weren't quite right. The official story, Dr. Chen continued, is that variants like you are the result of spontaneous genetic mutation, possibly triggered by environmental factors. Radiation exposure, chemical contamination, that sort of thing. It's a convenient explanation that satisfies the bureaucrats and keeps the general population from asking uncomfortable questions.
But it's not true. Not even close. Elena, what I'm about to show you is going to challenge everything you think you know about humanity's place in the galaxy. Are you prepared for that?
Elena thought about the golden eyes in the mirror that morning, about the way the other recruits looked at her now, about the voice in her head that whispered of hunting and stalking and prey that needed to be brought down.
I don't think I have a choice anymore.
Dr. Chen led her into a circular chamber dominated by a massive holographic projector. With a gesture, she activated the system, and the room filled with a three-dimensional star map that showed the galaxy in stunning detail. But this wasn't the neat, organized map from the orientation hall. This one was marked with symbols and color-coded regions that painted a very different picture of galactic civilization. This is what the galaxy really looks like, Dr. Chen said, manipulating the display to highlight specific areas.
The blue regions are fully civilized space, under complete coalition control. About 40% of known systems.
The green areas are partially civilized, with coalition presence but limited authority. Maybe another 30%. Elena studied the map, noting how much of the galaxy remained uncolored.
And the rest? Wild space. Unexplored systems, hostile environments, and things that the coalition prefers to pretend don't exist. Dr. Chen zoomed in on a section of the outer rim territories, revealing symbols that Elena recognized as warning markers. This is where we encounter the others. Others? Non-coalition species. Some are just primitive cultures that haven't developed interstellar travel yet. Some are actively hostile to any outside contact. And some.
Dr. Chen paused, her expression growing troubled.
Some are things that most coalition species can't even comprehend, let alone fight. The holographic display shifted, showing recorded footage of what looked like a battle in deep space.
Elena watched ships that she recognized as coalition vessels engaging something that her brain struggled to process. The enemy craft moved in patterns that hurt to follow, their forms shifting and flowing like liquid shadow.
The Umbraxi, Dr. Chen explained. First contact occurred 70 years ago in the Kepler sector. They destroyed 3 coalition fleets before we managed to establish a containment perimeter around their territory. Conventional weapons are useless against them. Energy shields don't stop them.
They phase in and out of normal space like they're swimming through dimensions.
How do you fight something like that? You don't.
At least, most species can't. Their technology and tactics are so far beyond coalition capabilities that engagement is basically suicide.
Dr. Chen manipulated the display again, showing casualty reports that made Elena's stomach turn.
Unless you happen to have soldiers who can adapt to impossible situations and think in ways that defy conventional logic.
Elena was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. Variants. Exactly.
It turns out that human variants are uniquely suited to dealing with threats that break the normal rules of engagement.
We don't know why yet.
It might be that your enhanced reflexes let you track enemies that move through multiple dimensions. It might be that your heightened intuition gives you tactical insights that pure logic can't provide.
Or it might be something else entirely. The holographic display changed again, showing combat footage that Elena initially thought was fake.
Human soldiers moving with impossible speed and coordination, engaging Umbraxi forces that seem to exist only partially in normal reality.
The humans weren't just surviving the encounters, they were winning. This is Squad 7, Dr. Chen said.
12 human variants, all volunteers, all trained in specialized combat techniques that work against non-coalition threats. They've been operating in the Outer Rim territories for 3 years, and their success rate against previously unengageable hostiles is 94%.
Elena watched the footage with growing amazement and horror.
The human soldiers moved like she had moved during her combat assessment, but with a level of coordination and lethality that suggested years of training and experience. They flowed around enemy attacks that should have been impossible to avoid, struck with precision that defied human limitations, and displayed a ruthless efficiency that was both inspiring and terrifying.
Is this what you want me to become? I want you to become whatever you're capable of becoming. Elena, your test scores from yesterday indicate capabilities that exceed even our current variant soldiers. Your reaction times, strength ratios, and tactical adaptability are all off the charts. But, more importantly, your psychological profile suggests something that we've never seen before. Dr. Chen called up a new display showing brain scans and neural activity patterns that look like abstract art rendered in electric blue and gold. These are your neural patterns during the combat assessment. Look at the activity in your amygdala and prefrontal cortex. Most humans show massive stress responses during life-threatening situations. Fight or flight activation, elevated cortisol, degraded decision-making capacity. You showed the exact opposite. Elena studied the scans, not understanding the technical details but recognizing something in the patterns that felt familiar. What does that mean? It means that while most people become less effective under extreme stress, you become more effective. Faster, stronger, smarter. Your brain doesn't treat life-threatening situations as emergencies to survive. It treats them as opportunities to excel. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, because they explain so much about her life. The calm she felt during the Toronto disaster while everyone else panicked. The clarity that had come over her during yesterday's combat trial. The way danger seemed to sharpen her senses rather than overwhelm them. You're saying I'm designed for this. I'm saying you're designed for something. Whether it's this specifically or something else remains to be seen. Dr. Chen deactivated the holographic display, and the chamber returned to normal lighting. But, before we can find out, you need to complete your basic training with the other recruits. Commander Thakresh wants to see how you perform in normal scenarios before we move on to specialized applications. Elena nodded, though part of her mind was still processing the footage of Squad 7. What about the other recruits? They already think I'm some kind of anomaly. Let them think what they want. Your job is to learn, not to manage their opinions. Besides, in a few days you'll be dealing with challenges that will put everyone's capabilities to the test. The Galaxy Defense Coalition doesn't train soldiers to fight the easy battles, Elena. We train them to face the things that other species can't handle. The return trip to the main training levels felt like traveling between different worlds. Elena's mind was reeling with everything she had learned, trying to process the implications of being part of something larger than she had ever imagined. The corridors seemed brighter than before, the station's artificial atmosphere more noticeable, as if her senses had been recalibrated during her time in the research facility. She was so lost in thought that she almost walked into the group of recruits gathered near the main training hall. Crexmore stood at the center, his forearms gesturing emphatically as he spoke to his usual audience of followers. "I'm telling you, there's something wrong with that human," he was saying. "Nobody moves like that without genetic enhancement or cybernetic augmentation. The Coalition must be running some kind of experiment. Maybe they're testing us," suggested Vexka. "Seeing how we react to an enhanced opponent." Elena tried to walk past without being noticed, but Crexmore's keen eyes spotted her immediately. "Speak of the anomaly," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the corridor. "How about you settle this debate for us, Vasquez? What kind of enhancement are you running? Genetic modification? Cybernetic implants? Some kind of combat drug?" Elena stopped, feeling the familiar surge of irritation that seemed to trigger her enhanced capabilities. She forced herself to remain calm, knowing that another display of unusual ability would only make things worse. "I'm not enhanced," she said quietly. "I'm just human." Crexmore laughed, the sound echoing off the metal walls. "Just human? Just human doesn't take down combat constructs that are designed to challenge warrior species. Just human doesn't move with reflexes that match the carry hunting speeds. Maybe your warrior species aren't as impressive as you think they are." The words were out before Elena could stop them, and she immediately regretted the provocation. The corridor fell silent, and she could see muscles tensing under Crexmore's armored skin. His followers shifted into more aggressive postures, and Elena realized that she had just made a very dangerous mistake. "What did you just say?"
Crexmore's voice had dropped to a growl that made Elena's enhanced hearing pick up harmonics that suggested barely controlled rage. I said maybe, I heard what you said. The massive the carry stepped closer, using his size to intimidate as he had before. But, this time, Elena didn't feel intimidated. She felt something else entirely, something that made her hands flex and her vision sharpen. I think it's time someone taught you about the natural order of things. Challenge circle, tomorrow morning. You and me, one-on-one. Elena opened her mouth to decline, to defuse the situation before it spiraled out of control. But, what came out instead was, accepted. Crexmore smiled, revealing teeth that had evolved for tearing flesh. Excellent. No weapons, no protective gear, just pure combat skill. Let's see how impressive your human abilities really are when you're facing a real opponent instead of a training simulation. Elena watched him walk away with his entourage, her enhanced hearing picking up their excited conversations about the coming fight. She had just agreed to face an opponent who was twice her size, 3 times her weight, and belonged to a species that had evolved as apex predators. By any rational analysis, she had just signed up for a beating that would probably end her military career. So why did she feel like smiling? That night, Elena lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with anticipation rather than fear. Something was happening to her, something that went beyond the physical enhancements she had discovered in Toronto. The old Elena would have been terrified of tomorrow's fight. The old Elena would have looked for ways to avoid the confrontation or minimize the damage. But, the old Elena had never known about Squad 7, or the Umbraxi, or the vast wild spaces where conventional rules didn't apply. The old Elena had spent 8 years trying to be normal, trying to fit in, trying to pretend that the voice in her head that whispered of hunting and stalking didn't exist. Tomorrow, Elena Vasquez was going to stop pretending. Tomorrow, she was going to find out what happened when a human designed for impossible challenges stopped holding back. The other recruits thought they were going to see their weakest link finally get put in her place. They had no idea they were about to witness the awakening of something that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Dawn came too early and not early enough. Elena had given up on sleep somewhere around 0300 hours, spending the remaining time before sunrise running through combat scenarios in her mind and trying to understand the changes she felt happening in her body. Her muscles felt different, denser somehow, as if they were rebuilding themselves at the cellular level. Her senses had sharpened to the point where she could hear conversations 3 rooms away and smell the unique scent signatures of different alien species throughout the station. Most unsettling of all was the voice in her head that had grown stronger overnight. Not voices in the sense of mental illness, but something deeper and more primal. Instincts that felt ancient and predatory, whispering about weak points and killing strikes and the sweet satisfaction of bringing down larger prey. Elena splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were still their normal brown, but there was something different in their depths. A kind of focused intensity that she had never seen before, as if something that had been sleeping for her entire life was finally beginning to wake up. The training grounds were already crowded when she arrived, word of the challenge having spread throughout the recruit population overnight. Elena counted at least 60 spectators arranged around the challenge circle, representing nearly every species in their training cohort. The betting pools had apparently started before breakfast, with odds heavily favoring Crexmore to end the fight in under 2 minutes. Commander Thakresh stood near the circle's edge, his massive frame radiating the kind of authority that made even the most aggressive recruits maintain respectful distance. When he saw Elena approaching, he gestured for her to join him away from the crowd. "Are you certain about this, Recruit Vasquez?" he asked, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Crexmore has 17 years of combat experience and physical advantages that make this an extremely uneven match. There's no shame in withdrawing from a challenge that was issued in anger. Elena looked across the circle at Crexmore, who was performing some kind of ritual stretching routine that showed off his impressive musculature to maximum effect. Forearms, each as thick as her waist. Retractable claws that could rend metal. Bone structure that could shrug off impacts that would shatter human bones. "I appreciate your concern, Commander," she said. "But, I accepted the challenge, and I intend to honor that commitment." Thakresh studied her face for a long moment, and Elena wondered what he saw there.
Very well. Standard challenge rules apply.
No weapons, no lethal techniques, fight continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue.
Medical teams are standing by. Elena nodded and walked toward the challenge circle, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes tracking her movement.
She could hear whispered conversations in languages from across the galaxy, most of them expressing variations on the same theme. The little human was about to learn a painful lesson about the realities of physical superiority. Crexmore was waiting for her at the circle's center, his forearms hanging loose at his sides in a deceptively casual pose that Elena's enhanced instincts immediately recognized as a combat-ready position. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had expected, his gray skin bearing the scars of old battles and his eyes holding the kind of predatory focus that came from a lifetime of successful violence. "Last chance to back down, little human," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume for the spectators to hear. "I don't want to send you home to your dirtball planet in pieces." Elena took her position across from him, noting the way his weight was distributed and the slight tension in his primary shoulders that suggested his preferred opening attack. The voice in her head was practically purring with anticipation, cataloging weaknesses and attack vectors with clinical precision. "I appreciate your concern," she said, unconsciously echoing her conversation with the commander.
"But I think I'll manage." "Begin." Thakresh's command echoed across the training ground.
Crexmore moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator, all four arms coming into play as he launched himself across the circle. His primary attack was a double-handed grab aimed at Elena's shoulders, designed to pin her arms and set up a crushing bear hug that would end the fight immediately.
Elena wasn't there when he arrived.
She had moved at the exact moment his feet left the ground, stepping aside with a dancer's precision and letting his momentum carry him past her. As he stumbled forward, off balance from his missed attack, Elena drove her elbow into the cluster of nerve pathways at the base of his skull with surgical accuracy. Crexmore went down like a falling tree, hitting the circle's padded floor hard enough to make the entire platform shake.
The crowd fell silent, not understanding what they had just witnessed.
Elena stood over her fallen opponent, feeling the familiar surge of golden fire behind her eyes. But Crexmore was tougher than the training construct had been. He rolled to his feet with impressive speed, shaking his head to clear the stunning blow and fixing Elena with a gaze full of newfound respect and barely controlled fury.
"Lucky shot," he growled, but Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice.
This time his attack was more calculated, a series of probing strikes designed to test her defenses rather than end the fight quickly. Elena flowed around his punches like water around stone, her enhanced reflexes making his powerful but straightforward attacks seem almost slow.
The crowd was no longer silent.
Elena could hear exclamations of surprise and disbelief in dozens of languages as the tiny human continued to avoid punishment from one of their cohort's most formidable fighters.
"How is she that fast?"
Vexka hissed to her companions.
"The carry reflexes are supposed to be among the best in the galaxy," added another voice.
Elena heard them, but their words seemed to come from very far away. Her world had narrowed to the circle, to her opponent, to the ancient dance of predator and prey that was playing out in front of dozens of witnesses. Crexmore was strong and experienced, but he was also predictable. His attacks followed patterns that Elena's enhanced instincts read like a book written in a language she had always known but never understood. Crexmore pressed his advantage, using his reach and multiple arms to create a zone of controlled violence that should have been impossible for Elena to penetrate. But she wasn't trying to penetrate it. She was studying it, learning its rhythm, waiting for the inevitable opening that would come when even the most skilled fighter began to tire. It came after 3 minutes of sustained combat, when Crexmore's breathing became labored and his strikes lost a fraction of their earlier precision. His upper left arm dropped 6 inches lower than it should have during a combination attack, creating a window that lasted perhaps half a second. Elena flowed through that window like smoke, her movement so fast that most of the spectators didn't see it happen. One moment she was on the defensive, and the next she was inside Crexmore's guard with her hand wrapped around his throat. She could have ended it there. The pressure point she was pressing would render him unconscious in seconds, and Elena could feel her enhanced strength would make it easy to crush his windpipe despite his armored skin. The predatory voice in her head whispered encouragement, urging her to finish what the carry had started. Instead, Elena stepped back and released her grip, putting distance between them and waiting for Crexmore to recover. The massive alien stared at her for a long moment, his forehands unconsciously moving to his throat where her fingers had been. Around them, the crowd had fallen completely silent, not understanding why the human had passed up an obvious victory.
Why? Crexmore asked, his voice rougher than before. Because the point was never to hurt you, Elena said. The point was to prove that strength isn't the only thing that matters in a fight.
Something shifted in Crexmore's expression, a recognition that went deeper than simple respect for combat skill. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone that Elena had never heard from him before.
I yield. The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical blow.
Crexmore, their acknowledged champion, the recruit that most of them looked up to as the epitome of warrior excellence, had just yielded to a human who weighed less than his left arm.
Elena walked to the edge of the circle, her enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation from the stunned spectators.
Words like impossible and unnatural and what as she floated through the air, but she also heard other things. Voices that carried newfound respect, curiosity, and something that might have been the beginning of acceptance.
Commander Thakresh approached as she was leaving the circle, his expression unreadable. Impressive display, Recruit Vasquez.
Though I notice you held back during the final exchange.
Sir?
You had a killing opportunity and chose not to take it. In a real combat situation, that kind of mercy could get you and your squad mates killed.
Elena met his gaze, seeing intelligence and concern in those alien eyes.
In a real combat situation, Commander, Crexmore would be fighting beside me, not against me.
Killing your allies is generally considered poor tactics.
The massive Gorvani actually smiled at that, an expression that transformed his scarred features into something almost grandfatherly.
Indeed it is. Report to Dr. Chen at 1400 hours. I believe it's time we began the next phase of your education.
Elena nodded and began walking toward the exit, conscious of the dozens of eyes still tracking her movement. She could feel the weight of their attention, the reassessment that was happening in minds that had dismissed her as irrelevant just days before.
She was halfway to the corridor when footsteps approached from behind.
Heavy footsteps, with the distinctive quadruple rhythm of the carry locomotion. Elena turned to find Crexmore walking toward her, his expression serious but no longer hostile.
Vasquez, he said when he reached her. We need to talk.
Elena glanced around at the other recruits, many of whom were still staring at them with undisguised fascination.
Okay. But maybe somewhere more private?
They found an empty corridor near the residential section, far enough from the training grounds that they could speak without being overheard. Crexmore leaned against the wall, his massive frame making the already large passage seem cramped.
I owe you an apology, he said without preamble.
I've been treating you like prey since the moment you arrived, and that was wrong.
You're not weak, you're not helpless, and you're definitely not human. The last statement hit Elena like a cold shock. What do you mean?
I mean that whatever you are, you're not the same species as the humans I've encountered before.
Your scent is different, your movement patterns are different, and the way you fight. Crexmore shook his head. My people evolved as pack hunters, Vasquez. We can recognize apex predators when we encounter them, even when they're disguised as something else.
Elena felt her heart racing, wondering how much Crexmore had guessed about her true nature.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do.
And, more importantly, you're starting to understand it yourself. The big alien straightened up, his expression growing more serious. Whatever you are, whatever's happening to you, it's not going to stay hidden much longer. The other recruits might not have the senses to detect it yet, but some of the instructors do. And if word gets back to certain factions within the coalition.
What factions?
Crexmore looked around nervously, as if worried about being overheard.
There are species within the coalition that view humans as a potential threat.
Your rapid technological advancement, your aggressive expansion into space, your tendency to succeed in situations where more advanced species fail. If they discover that some humans possess capabilities that exceed even established warrior races.
Elena began to understand the implications.
They'd see us as competition. Or worse. They'd see you as a threat that needs to be eliminated before it becomes unmanageable. Crexmore placed one of his massive hands on Elena's shoulder, the gesture surprisingly gentle. I don't know what the coalition has planned for you, but be careful who you trust.
Not everyone wants to see humanity succeed.
Elena watched him walk away, her mind reeling with the implications of their conversation. She had come to the station expecting to face the challenge of proving herself to alien warriors. She had never imagined that her real challenge would be navigating political currents that could determine the future of her entire species. Her reflection was interrupted by the arrival of Vexka and 2 other Draknari, their approach silent despite their size. Elena tensed, expecting another confrontation, but the lead female's posture suggested something different.
Vasquez, Vexka said, her usual hostility replaced by something that might have been curiosity. That was an impressive display in the circle.
Thank you, Elena said cautiously. My people have a saying, judge a warrior by their enemies, not their victories.
Crexmore is considered one of the finest fighters of his generation.
For him to acknowledge your superiority. Vexka tilted her head in what Elena realized was a gesture of respect. Perhaps we have been too quick to judge based on appearances.
Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak.
The day had brought so many changes that she was struggling to process them all. This morning she had been an outcast, dismissed and mocked by her fellow recruits. Now she was someone who commanded respect and raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of human potential. The corridor gradually filled with other recruits as word of the challenge spread throughout the station. Elena found herself surrounded by beings who had previously ignored her existence, all of them eager to understand what they had witnessed in the challenge circle. But, even as she answered their questions and accepted their grudging respect, Elena's mind was focused on her upcoming meeting with Dr. Chen. The research facility below the station held answers to questions she was only beginning to understand, and she had a feeling that today would bring revelations that would change everything. The old Elena Vasquez had wanted nothing more than to blend in, to serve quietly and prove that humans could contribute to the galactic community. But the old Elena was disappearing, replaced by something that the galaxy wasn't prepared to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to discover what she was truly capable of. But tonight, Elena Vasquez sat in her small quarters and tried to understand that she was no longer just a human trying to find her place among alien warriors. She was something else entirely, and the galaxy was about to find out what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be less than it was. The emergency alarms began screaming at 0347 hours, jolting Elena from the first real sleep she had managed since arriving at the station. Red warning lights strobed through her quarter's small viewport, and the station's artificial gravity fluctuated as massive systems diverted power to defensive configurations. Elena was out of bed and dressed in her combat gear before her conscious mind fully processed what was happening. The predatory instincts that had been growing stronger each day responded to the crisis with an eagerness that should have been disturbing but, instead, felt perfectly natural. The corridors were chaos. Recruits and instructors moved with urgent purpose toward battle stations, while automated systems announced containment breaches and casualty reports in the clipped, emotionless tones of artificial intelligence. Elena joined the flow of bodies heading toward the main command center, her enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation that painted a picture of disaster.
Outer perimeter compromised.
3 escort vessels destroyed.
Unknown hostile, designation Priority Alpha.
The command center was a cathedral of screens and holographic displays, showing real-time tactical information from throughout the system. Elena found herself pressed against the back wall with dozens of other recruits, all of them straining to understand what was happening. Commander Thakrash stood at the center of the organized chaos, his massive frame radiating calm authority despite the crisis unfolding around him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly over the ambient noise of the command center. At approximately 0340 hours, an unknown vessel breached the outer system perimeter.
3 coalition escort ships moved to intercept and establish communication. All three vessels were destroyed within minutes by what appears to be a single hostile entity. The main display shifted to show sensor readings from the destroyed ships, and Elena felt her blood run cold. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Coalition databases, showing patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Umbraxi?" asked Captain Nexforth, the station's chief tactical officer. "Unknown. Energy signatures are similar but not identical to known Umbraxi patterns. The entity appears to be heading directly for this station." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach as the implications became clear. Whatever had destroyed those escort ships was coming here, to a training facility filled with recruits and civilian personnel who had never seen real combat. "Estimated time to contact?" Thakresh asked. 14 minutes at current approach speed. Elena watched the tactical display update in real time, showing the hostile entity's trajectory as a red line cutting through space toward their position. The entity was moving faster than anything in Coalition records, and its path showed no deviation or hesitation. "All recruits return to quarters immediately," Thakresh commanded. "This is not a training exercise. Station defense protocols are now in effect." The crowd of recruits began to disperse, but Elena found herself moving against the flow, pushing toward the front of the command center instead of toward the exit. Something was calling to her, an instinct that went deeper than conscious thought. "Recruit Vasquez." Commander Thakresh's voice cut through the noise of the command center. "I said return to quarters." "Sir, request permission to remain," Elena said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I think I might be able to help." Thakresh looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Around them, the command center staff continued their preparations for what was beginning to look like an impossible battle. "Dr. Chen to command center immediately," the commander said into his comm unit. Then, to Elena, "Stay against the wall and don't interfere with operations." Dr. Chen arrived within minutes, moving through the crowded command center with the kind of focused urgency that Elena had learned to associate with genuine crisis. When she reached them, her expression was grim. "You felt it, didn't you?" she asked Elena without preamble. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. From the moment the alarms had started, something had been awakening inside her. The predatory instincts that had been growing stronger each day were now fully alert, responding to a threat that her conscious mind couldn't yet understand. "What is it?" Thakresh asked. "Unknown," Dr. Chen replied. "But Elena's neural patterns are showing massive activation in areas that we've never seen active before. Whatever's coming, her enhanced instincts recognize it as a significant threat." The main display shifted to show external cameras, revealing a view of space that made Elena's enhanced vision immediately focus with laser intensity. Something was approaching the station, something that her eyes could track despite its impossible speed and the way it seemed to phase in and out of normal reality. "Visual contact established," announced the sensor operator. "Range 400 kilometers and closing." Elena stared at the display, trying to process what she was seeing. The entity was roughly spherical but constantly changing shape, its surface rippling with patterns that hurt to follow. Energy discharges played across its form in colors that had no names, and the space around it seemed to bend and twist as if reality itself was being warped by its presence. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, and Elena realized with shock that the voice was her own. Dr. Chen grabbed her arm, fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Elena, look at me. Look at me right now." Elena tore her gaze away from the display, meeting Dr. Chen's concerned eyes. "I'm okay. I can see what it is." "What do you mean?" Elena struggled to find words for something that went beyond normal perception. "It's not just an entity. It's a hunter. An apex predator that's been searching for something specific, and it found what it was looking for." "What is it looking for?" Thakresh demanded. Elena met his gaze, feeling certainty settle into her bones like cold steel. "Me. It's looking for me." The entity struck the station's outer defensive grid with enough force to make the entire structure shudder. Elena watched the tactical display as energy shields that could withstand direct hits from battleship weapons failed almost immediately.
Shields down to 60%, reported the tactical officer. Return fire with all defensive batteries, Thakresh ordered. The station's weapons systems opened up with everything they had, filling the space around the entity with enough destructive energy to vaporize a small moon.
Elena watched the bombardment with growing certainty that it would be useless. She was right.
The entity flowed through the weapon's fire like water through a net, its form shifting and phasing in patterns that made conventional targeting impossible. When the defensive barrage ended, it was completely unharmed and still approaching. Shields down to 30%, the tactical officer announced, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her, like a door opening that had been sealed her entire life. The predatory instincts that had been growing stronger each day suddenly exploded into full awareness, flooding her consciousness with knowledge that felt both ancient and absolutely natural.
"I know what it is," she said, her voice carrying a certainty that made everyone in the command center turn toward her. "It's a keeper. A guardian entity created by one of the precursor races to hunt down and eliminate potential threats to galactic stability."
"That's impossible," Dr. Chen said.
"The precursor races died out millions of years ago. Their guardians didn't.
They've been sleeping in deep space, waiting for specific trigger conditions." Elena moved toward the main display, her enhanced vision tracking the entity's movement patterns with growing understanding.
"This one was triggered by my transformation. By what I'm becoming." "What are you becoming?"
Thakresh asked quietly. Elena looked around the command center, seeing fear and confusion in dozens of alien faces. These beings represented the pinnacle of galactic civilization, the best and brightest that 1,000 worlds had to offer. And they were helpless against a single entity that had been created to hunt down threats like her. "I'm becoming something that scares the people who designed the universe," she said. "Something that the precursors thought was too dangerous to be allowed to exist." The station shuddered again as the entity struck their defenses with increasing force. Elena could see the tactical display updating in real time, showing shield strength dropping toward 0 and casualty reports beginning to stream in from the outer sections.
"Elena, Dr. Chen said urgently, if you know what this thing is, do you know how to stop it?"
Elena felt the predatory voice in her head growing stronger, whispering strategies and possibilities that defied everything she thought she knew about herself.
The entity wasn't just hunting her.
It was challenging her, testing her, trying to determine if she was truly the threat that its programming had identified. "I don't think I'm supposed to stop it," she said slowly.
"I think I'm supposed to face it."
"Absolutely not," Thakresh said immediately. "You're a recruit with minimal combat training facing an entity that just destroyed 3 warships." Elena looked at him, seeing concern and determination in those alien eyes. He was trying to protect her, trying to find a conventional solution to an unconventional problem. But conventional solutions wouldn't work against something that existed outside the normal rules of reality.
"Commander, with respect, conventional tactics aren't going to work here. The entity isn't just attacking the station. It's calling me out.
And if I don't answer that call, it's going to keep tearing through everything and everyone until it gets what it wants." The main display flickered and changed, showing internal camera feeds from throughout the station. Elena watched sections that had been sealed begin to buckle and fail as the entity pressed its attack. Emergency teams rushed to contain hull breaches while automated systems struggled to maintain life support in damaged areas.
"Shields down to 5%, the tactical officer reported. Hull integrity compromised on decks 7 through 12. Elena made her decision.
She turned toward the exit, moving with the fluid grace that had become natural since her transformation began. Behind her, she could hear Dr. Chen and Commander Thakresh calling her name, but their voices seemed to come from very far away. The corridors were empty now, most of the station's personnel having taken shelter in reinforced areas. Elena moved through the abandoned passages with growing certainty, following instincts that led her toward the station's main docking bay. The entity wanted to face her, and she was going to give it that opportunity. The docking bay was a vast chamber designed to accommodate everything from personal shuttles to massive cargo haulers. Elena stood in the center of the empty space and looked up at the reinforced viewing windows that provided a direct view of space beyond. The entity was there, waiting just beyond the station's defensive perimeter. Up close, it was even more imposing than the tactical displays had suggested. Roughly the size of a coalition cruiser but, constantly shifting shape, its surface rippled with patterns that Elena's enhanced vision could follow despite their complexity. "I'm here," she said quietly, not knowing if the entity could hear her but certain that it would understand. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The entity flowed through the docking bay's energy barriers like they didn't exist, its form condensing and solidifying as it entered the station's atmosphere. Elena watched it take shape in front of her, becoming something that her mind could more easily process. What stood before her now was humanoid but clearly not human. Nearly 3 meters tall, with proportions that suggested both incredible strength and impossible grace. Its skin was the color of deep space, and its eyes held the kind of ancient intelligence that made Elena feel like a child pretending to be an adult. When it spoke, its voice resonated through the docking bay with harmonics that seemed to bypass her ears and speak directly to her consciousness. "You have awakened," it said, the words carrying meanings that went far beyond simple language.
The sleepers stir, the old paths open, and the galaxy trembles at the birth of a new apex.
Elena felt something respond deep within her, something that recognized the entity's words as both challenge and acknowledgement. When she spoke, her own voice carried harmonics that she had never heard before.
"I am awake. What do you want with me?"
"I am Azrael Prime, keeper of the Ninth Seal, guardian of the deep protocols. I was created to test those who would claim dominion over the spaces between stars." The entity circled her slowly, its movement predatory and appraising.
"You carry the mark of the Ancient Ones, the genetic echo of those who came before. Show me what you have become." Elena understood. This wasn't an attack or an invasion.
It was a trial, a test administered by guardians that had been sleeping since before her species had learned to make fire. The entity wanted to see if she was worthy of whatever legacy the precursors had left behind.
She let the transformation take her completely. The change was more dramatic than anything she had experienced before.
Elena felt her body reshape itself at the cellular level, muscles becoming denser, reflexes accelerating beyond anything that should have been biologically possible. Her vision expanded into spectrums that had no names, and her hearing picked up harmonics that painted a three-dimensional map of everything within kilometers. But the most profound change was in her mind. The predatory instincts that had been growing stronger each day exploded into full consciousness, flooding her awareness with knowledge and capabilities that felt both foreign and absolutely natural. When the transformation was complete, Elena Vasquez no longer existed. In her place stood something that the galaxy had no name for, something that the precursors had designed to be the ultimate expression of evolutionary potential.
Azrael Prime studied her transformed state with what might.